Welcome everybody to yet another Coffee with God today. And today we've got Elizabeth talking about her very special subject, and I'm going to let her describe it to you. I don't have the words for it. And Sue Rackozky is joining her in the conversation today. So without further ado, thank you everyone for joining, and let's enjoy this time with Elizabeth and Sue. Over to you, Elizabeth.
All right, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Bonnie, for the invitation. I look forward to this. And I don't know, Sue, did you want to say something first, or shall I just jump in?
Before Sue speaks, Elizabeth, can you do something that you're a little louder? We did try earlier. Sit closer and press your try again. Just say hi.
Can you hear me better now?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Over to you, Sue. Would you like to tell everybody a little bit about why you are here with Elizabeth?
Okay. Thanks, Bonnie. It's nice to see friends, and it's nice to meet new friends. I was the co-supervisor of Elizabeth's doctoral thesis at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, together with Professor Graham Lindiger, because her thesis, as you will see, crosses the two disciplines of psychology and spirituality. So I walked with Elizabeth this very long journey, and Graham and I really celebrated on graduation day. So as I understand today's time together, Elizabeth has a PowerPoint, which she will present. And then I've prepared some questions, which I sent to Elizabeth, and we'll have a conversation about them, but I don't know if we'll run out of time in the sense that will there be time for questions from other people, but we'll see. So over to you, Elizabeth.
All right, thank you. I'm going to put the PowerPoint on now. Doesn't seem to be coming. Oh, share screen. Is it? Let's see. EJ, do you want to just give me a clue? Because, yeah.
Maybe how large is your file?
Sorry?
How large is your file?
No, I used it yesterday. It was fine.
Oh.
I was able to do it.
Maybe just unshare and then open the presentation and then try sharing it again.
Okay, right. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
All right, can you see it now?
Yes,
Is it coming through now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. All right. Technical things. Okay. So I want to present the a brief background of the dissertation. The long academic title is In Their Voices, A Study of God Images of Southern African Women with a Physical Disability Using the Interdisciplinary Perspectives of the Feminist Theology of Elizabeth A. Johnson and the Analytical Psychology of Carl Jung. Actually, this interdisciplinary included three disciplines: the theology, the psychology, and disability. So just to give you a brief context of the background, but I want the focus of my presentation are actually the stories of a couple of the people that that I worked with. So first of all, who is Elizabeth Johnson? Is an American feminist theologian. She aligns herself with a branch of feminism which works towards transformation of male-dominated tradition. Her starting points come from classic Catholic theology. And what caught me with her readings, she has written several books, and the question that really caught me in terms of the background, the foundation for using her theology was her question, what is the right way to speak about God? She asked this question as a basis of her own groundbreaking book, She Who Is. And that opened up for me the question about how women with a physical disability experienced God. And whatever they have learned from education or from their background, family, church, whatever, I just wonder if it was relevant for them. So her theology actually has inspired women and men to think differently about the images of God from a feminist perspective. It has also confounded many traditional patriarchal thinkers and administrative authorities, but she is more than up to the task of responding to them, giving truth to power. She didn't write specifically about physical disability, but she argued that a single physical trait should not be the only anthropological constant that comprises one's identity. And I found in my research that a couple of participants felt that in some instances, their disability or their gender was seen and decisions were made about them based solely on projections that were the impressions of other people, without people taking into account other aspects of their personality and their gender. Now I'm going to skip quickly to Carl Jung. He was a Swiss psychiatrist who developed his own version of psychoanalysis called analytical psychology. His theory provides for how images emerge from within the psyche spontaneously from the unconscious, which function as a movement towards wholeness. And in my own search in my early 30s, which was decades ago, I was searching myself for my questions of what does my own disability mean, and my own spirituality in terms of Christianity mean. And I happened to come across a therapist who was also a priest, and he introduced me to dreams. He said, do you ever have dreams to bring into the session? And at that point, I never did. And but within 3 weeks, I had half a notebook full of dreams. And those dreams were the beginning of really a transformation for myself. When I was a child, I had polio right before the vaccine came out. And so I used crutches and now a brace. But as growing up, I never had anyone who would actually talk to me about what it meant to have this physical condition, what it meant socially or physically, psychologically. And so I was really at a loss in my early 30s to begin to work on this. And the dreams that I had in the beginning were all about myself as a child in a hospital bed. So they took me right back to where I needed to be emotionally and psychologically. And that spurred me on to want to continue in learning more about the unconscious. And I had the great privilege of changing careers from being a teacher to getting my training in analytical psychology. And now I function as a Jungian analyst. The analytical psychology from Carl Jung includes religious experiences. He identifies the natural, instinctive urge to search for meaning. It is a quest to give our lives meaning, something that goes beyond one's individual and limited existence. We search for something larger than our ego self. If we do not search consciously, Jung tells us that something else will take central place, becoming a god in our lives. An addiction to power, money, sex, substances, or even overwork can become an obsession which possesses a person. So the Jungian approach, as probably most of you know, does have a spiritual component to it. This was also a very important meaning for me in my search when I was in analysis. This was later on in my life, in my 40s. I was really searching around Christianity. I was in and out of church. I was questioning my upbringing as a Catholic. And sure enough, from the unconscious came many, many images, many symbols having to do with Christianity. And one of the symbols I will share is that the church itself was completely destructed. It was just in rubble with only one particular wall standing. And on that wall was an image of Mary, the feminine. And that told me a lot. And so I had several dreams about my Christianity, which helped me immensely in reconstructing, you might say, what Christianity and Catholicism actually meant to me. And now I want to skip quickly to the methodology, which in this particular study comprised of 3 aspects. The first is reflexivity. It means the researcher must take into account their own biases and how they influence the participants to tell their stories and how the data is handled and interpreted. And this was especially important in this particular study because I have an obvious disability. And so when I met the participants, they immediately saw that I had some experience with disability myself. It also meant that because I was speaking with people who had different disabilities, visually impaired, amputation, etc., that I had to be very careful that I did not bring into the conversation or my thinking my own experience. And my focus was to allow people to tell their stories with an objective learner as much as I could be. The second methodology was the verbal interviews, and we're very familiar with this. I met 3 times with each woman privately in their homes. And the first interview, they told me their stories about physical disability and images of God experiences, particularly around these 2 things. And prior to this, however, they had never thought that these 2 areas, important areas of their life, could possibly intersect. They had not considered how their disability experiences and their God images could possibly have affected each other. It was a new question for all of them. The third methodology was the artwork. In the first session, I left art materials with each woman who then took the artwork on their own, who did this on their own, which portrayed their narrative in a non-verbal way. Each one said that something new emerged from their stories that gave them a different perspective and a new insight, understanding these two areas of their lives. And you see, according to Jung, one of the ways that we tap into the unconscious is using nonverbal methods, like artwork. When I was doing my analysis, I did a lot of artwork. It taps into the unconscious by definition. It's something that you are not necessarily aware of in your conscious verbal depiction of your experiences. Okay, I want to just show you that some artwork in some form has been used throughout the ages to express religious themes and experiences over time, which can facilitate exploration and expression of one's spiritual journey. It's also a very powerful tool for psychological expression and integration of one's personal journey, including wounding. And the first example I want to give is from a painting made from one of the visions of Saint Hildegard of Bingen. We're probably familiar with her. And then she had a close friend, I guess, paint these. And through that, we see that a new vision of church came through for her. Sophia, Mother Wisdom, Mother Church. Another example is the painting, of Frida Kahlo, as she is also a well-known Mexican painter that we know. We understand that she had polio herself when she was a child. And then in her teens, she had a terrible accident which disabled her and gave her pain throughout her life, plus emotional pain. Now, in this particular painting, the two Fridas, we see that she has honored her wounded part, her hurting part, and she has integrated it to her competent out there social life, and both aspects of herself are equal in dimension. They both have their hearts exposed, and the pain and also the joy and love. And if anyone here has had a wounding of some kind, physical or perhaps an experience of limitation, sometimes we just want to forget that part of ourselves. We diminish it. We want to put us aside, and that and put forth a strong, competent self. And yet Frida shows us here that we can see both sides as equal. Okay, Jung also critiqued the traditional Christianity for its one-sided portrayal of an all-good, perfect divinity who could have nothing to do with any imperfection. And here's an example of one participant, Kay, and these names I have made up to preserve their confidentiality. Kay described a particular faith community's belief about disability and what she had to deal with when she belonged to this group. Jesus was portrayed as being in spiritual war against his adversary, the devil, and Kay was caught in between. This is her quote, my blindness, or at that stage, I just call it partial sightedness, was the result of Adam's sin. But as long as I accepted it as my lot, I had it. I was not to accept my disability. I had to throw it out and resist it. I actually had to write letters and say that in Jesus' name I was healed, although there was evidence to the contrary. I was not allowed to criticize God at all. God at that point was absolute perfection. I felt a very big responsibility for keeping up God's end and making him look good, it was a heavy burden. And by the end of that period, I was carrying that burden without even realizing it. Okay, I want to go now to briefly look at some information from disability studies, ableism. And we know that any ism is actually born out of a kind of a projection. I'm like this and you're like that. I'm disabled and you are able-bodied. And it creates division among people, and it labels people. So a definition is stereotypical images of persons with a disability are measured in society against what is described as normal images of human appearance, behavior, and communication. The disabled are frequently portrayed as other in communities, including faith communities. Prejudices can be internalized, contributing to negative self-concepts, lack of confidence, and a submissive attitude with others. Theologian Kathy Black, a deaf United Methodist minister, quotes a stigmatizing attitude which some able-bodied people hold. Theologically, it was hard to believe that persons with disabilities were made in the image of God. And that's a horrible, horrible projection that one would have to carry. I'm not going to read all of this. These are disability experiences that I picked up from the research. There was an interruption of life journey and challenges around the processing of disability. People really had told their story that it was almost impossible to find people who would actually talk it through with them. There's change of life plans, adaptation to physical changes, social barriers, stigmas, independence and dependence issues came up. It also stimulated a search for meaning. When you have a physical disability, whether it's blindness, deafness, mobility, communication, intellect, then you are forced to enter into some kind of journey to find meaning in this. And the sources can come from all kinds of places. From people, friends, family, the church. There can also be models of disabled person, images of God taught and spontaneous. And we also discovered that there was a moving towards wholeness, or that there will always be a kind of ambivalence, and there were evolving understanding of disability and images of God. Now I want to enter into the specific stories. I will only have time, I think, for 2 stories. If we have more time, perhaps I can give the third. But then, okay, let us begin with Anne. Again, this is not her real name. She was a single woman in her 40s when I talked with her. Her leg was amputated when she was a teenager due to a driver hitting her motorcycle. She was greatly supported by her family, but people around her had expectations, very high expectations of her ability, and it was impossible for her to get the emotional support she needed. She could only process her disability at a later stage of her life. As a result of her impairment, she could no longer pursue her ambition to be a musician. She reoriented her life study to her life work to study theology and chose to become a minister. She studied to become a minister in the environment of misogyny, where she painfully endured the prejudices against her as a woman. This is the first picture. If you look carefully at it, I'm going to describe the pictures as we go along. she decided to do the pictures. I gave them no instructions whatsoever. They could decide what they want, but she decided to do this in terms of stages of her life. This represents the early stage prior to her accident, up until she was, 17 years old. And you can see that she drew herself at the bottom in green. There's a green outline at the foot of a tree. It represents, the green for her represents growth, both the tree and herself. She's also connected to these, if you can see it, these structures to the right-hand side. The structures represented the institutions, the school, the church, the home, and she herself was an extension of her foundational structures. Through the structures, she came to know God, and this was her stability in youth. She was very active in the community, and she was musically gifted. She would play the organ in church, and she was also a cellist. And she planned her career to become a musician. The notes that you see in the center are musical notes, and they are in purple. At this time, this was the color of joy for her. And as she said, also royalty. She felt on top of the world. She was highly respected as a tower of competence and strength in her community. The next picture represents the next stage of her life. This is after her accident until her late 20s. As I said before, Anne had no one to talk about with her disabling condition, and there were expectations from the community. Anne can handle things. No one helped her find expression or understand the pain and changes going on in her life. The family did support her. Her mother gave her consolation. Her father was a great support. But she repeatedly told me that she had no one who really could enter into her own process. This was a period that she calls the period of questioning. Anne had to give up her vision of becoming a musician. She could not play the organ or cello again. She began a new career track. She began theological studies and an internship in a congregation. The period of struggle. Struggle, first, breaking gender barriers with other women in doing theology, leg amputation with her disability. She experienced social barriers, and she struggled with questions about her disability experiences, which changed her life. God for her at this point was a big heart. She understood this as the delight of God, the hugeness of God, and his love. At this point, God was very masculine. That's what she had been taught her whole life and in seminary. And you can see in this picture is going into the heart of God, growing closer to God. The green ladder, growth into God to be more Christ-like. The purple here, however, is not of joy. It is of deep sorrow. And you can see on the right-hand side that the sorrow is being now mixed with black, because slowly, the part that she's never looked at before was beginning to show. So there was a deep contrast. We go to the third picture, the next stage of her life, which she calls the period of suffering, struggle, and knowledge. Now, what does this mean? Well, the depression that she had kept down for all these years emerged, it surfaced, and describes the depression eventually as a necessary experience of darkness. But when she was in it, she was alone, although she started at this point to search for therapy and get some help from her for her understanding of it. But it also represented a significant shift in her awareness of God, which I'll talk about in a minute. But another word that she assigned to this stage was separateness. Her head, if you look at her head, it's out of proportion because she went into her head. She escaped into her head, into knowledge. And believe it or not, she acquired several, more than one, academic degrees. She just buried herself in that realm. It was also separation from people. She experienced relationships that were broken off and had to face that she would not be married. And this was a horrible realization for her. Again, another vision for her life was shattered. Eventually, during this time, she came to the realization, and I'm quoting, "I cannot think God out." She knew that her image of God needed to be changed. About this time, Anne came in contact with other spiritual women who introduced her to feminist theology and who changed her way of thinking theologically and who supported her. The next picture represents the next phase, new God images. The God image here is fluid, dynamic, open-ended. There is color and new life. Underneath the colors, which you cannot see, is the word mysterium. That, what she says, that is how I see God now, and life, and creation, and everything, as mystery. There are two hands. She asks, are they God's hands or are they mine? They are so connected, so interlinked. I'm not sure. Is it community? She also brought forth some of the darkness, the blackness, because she said, this is the blackness there. This is dark, but God is in that too. It's part of the mystery and connectedness. This represented a transformation for her. It brought much reflection and insight. She said, I will never have to go back to that depression. She was lifted out of the darkness, and she began to talk about redefining disability as disconnectedness. The final picture, whoops, let me go back. The final picture, she chose white clay, and she specifically said a few times that whiteness is very important. She said we are all in whiteness. She uses the term about God, panentheism, not pantheism, panentheism, which means pan, all, en, in, and theism, God. In other words, panentheism considers God and the world to be interrelated, with the world being in God and the God in the world. And hence the whiteness was so important to her. The whole of creation, humanity, non-humanity, creatures, everything. And she used the expression, it's like an embryo floating in the uterus of God. She defined suffering as not being connected. So we see in the picture, there is a mouth, there's two brains, an eye, a hand, a heart. And for her, she needed to represent humanity in this way. And yet God is bigger than what we can understand. The disability she redefines is everywhere there is a lack of connection with the greater, when we do not live connected with God. And she quotes scripture. She says, anyone who acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God remains in him and they in God. from John. She said that everyone has disability spiritually. She sees this as being an intricate part of human nature, belonging to every person, their disconnection from God and others. She also mentions the church as being disabled as well, and yet it is being held in the hands of God. The image of God liberates disability from being restricted to a particular group of people and from a particular physical condition. And as I was listening to her story and the others, I was not there to critique or to in any way judge what her spiritual process was. It made sense to her, and this was very meaningful. Now I want to go on. This just shows her evolution from her foundation to the final picture that she made. Now I want to go on to another journey, Kay's journey of disability and images of God. Kay was in her late 40s. Her vision began to degenerate when she was 10 years old. By the time she was 18, she was legally blind. She asserted herself from overprotective parents and insisted that she go to university and live on campus. She found support from friends and completed her degree. There was little religious education in childhood, but she experienced various faith communities on her journey. She did not have emotional support from her family or career guidance. This had a negative impact on her sense of usefulness and place in society. She suffered from self-esteem and isolation and entered into a solitary search in her relationship to God with peripheral help from others, and discovered more positive images of the loving God. She bravely continued her struggle to find emotional support and meaningful ministry. She came to a self-understanding as a wounded healer. The first picture from Kay is represented here. Now, mind you, she was partially visually impaired, and I offered her the option of doing artwork and music because she was musically inclined also, and she could play the guitar. She sometimes wrote her own music, but she when I came back, I discovered that she wanted to do drawings. Now, at this point, she could only really distinguish highly contrasting colors. So her drawing, of course, is not going to be aesthetically, this is not what we're looking for. So she was also going through a great deal of stress and anxiety at this time. The first picture is the God image that she portrayed as the swing plank to which she clung. She needed security and reassurance to cope with her anxiety and fears. We see the wave of sea, which she described as threatening. She said her contact with God on the swing, God was holding her. She says God's presence supports. Her next picture is taken from the Old Testament knowledge, she said. And this particular picture was a spontaneous image that came to her. She didn't know why at first. She described it as the mercy seat of God, upon which sat two cherubim facing each other. This portrayed a different kind of support for her. She said, God is in the mind of the people and provides mercy. She talked about this holy place is in complete darkness. Only the high priest was allowed to enter, who implored God's mercy on behalf of the Israelites. And this inspired her to think about what God might be calling her to do for others. she began to think that blindness had a purpose spiritually. She said, I felt that my eyesight wasn't an accident or a curse. I felt that it was more of a way of being qualified in some way. And she was beginning to pray, Lord, I want to be a priest to your people. She said that going into this dark place in both senses, the Holy of Holies and the dark, wounded place in her life, was definitely a preparation for her to think about what ministry she was going to go into. Her final picture was from the New Testament. This drawing represents an important shift in Kay's spiritual journey. It was a shift from God images that were powerful and somewhat impersonal and distant. Her religious community experiences emphasized God the Father and God the Holy Spirit. But the reality of God as human, Jesus Christ, was not developed in her. And this represents the stage at which Jesus became real to her. It's somebody washing somebody else's feet. And she made she put the words, the meek supporter, loving hands, and holy hold. She said about this picture, it's Jesus washing feet in humility, intimately touching a foot she drew it first and then thought more about it afterwards. She said a creation is taking place. Jesus became really important to her. She began to say, I can see Jesus in my neighbor's eyes. Jesus walks and talks with us, and for me, that is still hard to accept. And those are the three pictures which evolved. Now, I'm going to skip this one for lack of time. If we do have time, we can come back. So in my research, there were three things that came up. The images of God and disability, which presented challenges or impediments in all of these areas. Physical, psychological, relationships, career, and Christianity. The second theme we picked up was the images of God and disability that were enhancements in their life journey. In other words, they grew in independent thinking. They had to search on their own. There were positive understandings of disability and liberating God images. The third theme of images of God and disability were catalysts for meaning in their journey. Images of God and disability were moving towards paradox and choice, not the split good and evil. God is in the dark. God embraces the dark as well as the light, and choice. Transformation of adversity. The gifts were emerging. Disability or any limitations were not seen as obstacles, but were actually means to find their ministry. And the wounded healer, and calling out to reach other people. And it must be remembered that changes noted in God images and thinking about disability are not static, nor are the women completely transformed. For many persons with disability, there will always be ambivalence at times, and in their images of God and their feelings. But some examples of the evolution of God images, which expanded God images. God no longer as a fixer, to God as creative cooperation. From God as a judge and an absolute good, to God of paradox and affirming of disability. God as a punisher or a difficult old man or a spoiled sport God, to a God of promoting solidarity with. God is static and controlling, moving to God of empowerment and participation. God is limited to understanding, to God of mystery, awe, and connectedness. And that is the end of my presentation. Yeah, trying to get, yeah. So.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you. Wow. Goodness. I'm going to hand straight over to Sue before I say anything else. Thank you, Elizabeth. Very, very powerful stuff. Very. Thank you. Sue, can you unmute?
I can. Elizabeth, thank you very much. As we both know, we've walked a very long journey, and I continue to learn new things about your work, and that's wonderful. Share with us how you found these women and how you developed rapport with them.
Right. How I found the women were, some were referrals. People knew I was doing this. I kind of put it out to my friends and colleagues. And then, yeah, some people said, well, I know somebody. And yeah, so one of the criteria for me before I even contacted them was, first of all, do they have a physical disability? And second of all, are they on some kind of spiritual journey? It does not have to be, well, it didn't have to be Christian journey or anything, just a spiritual journey, so that they could relate to the questions that I was asking, and we would see what would emerge. And then also, I happened to meet somebody on retreat who was who had the person who was visually impaired. I met on a retreat, and I thought about her, and I said, so I asked her after the retreat, and she said she was very willing. So that's how I found the people.
And developing rapport with them?
And developing rapport, right. Well, as I mentioned before, reflexivity played a very important part, because they saw immediately I had some kind of disability, and that created a trust almost immediately. And then I would say what was important was listening, open listening, and helping to clarify, but not editing or questioning their experience, just accepting their experience.
Okay, thank you. Suppose you had the opportunity to sit down with Beth Johnson and share your work. And I know her personally, and I'm sure that she'd be very interested in it. But what kind of questions would you like to ask her in terms of what you've learned about women's images of God?
Okay, thank you. Yes, right after my dissertation, I did contact her, and I just told her what I was doing. And, you know, it was bad timing because it was exactly the time she was retiring from Fordham University, and she had a lot on her mind and everything. It was just not the right time to have a conversation. Maybe, perhaps at some time we will. But okay, one of the things that came up for me is that under the umbrella of feminist theology, what I discovered in my research was that often women with a disability, let's say any disability, were often neglected or even pushed aside from the feminist perspective. And I would ask her about that, what she knew about that. And I think it may have changed by now, because women with disability and feminist theology are really, there's a lot of more things being written about, and their voices are being heard. But that was an interesting, thing for me to find out.
Well, now that Beth has been retired a few years, I would encourage you to contact her again.
Okay, indeed.
And I'm going to ask a similar question about Jung. Now, Jung died in 1961, and that was the beginning of the second feminist revolution.
Yeah.
But as we both know, Jung didn't have a lot of positive things to say often about women. But what would you share with him about your work, and what do you think he would say?
Oh, okay. Well, he did promote the feminine, but I get what you're talking about. In the reading, one cringes with what he says sometimes. He was coming straight out of his culture, Swiss culture. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. One thing I thought about in terms of Jung is and doing analysis with people with a disability, that usually if a person dreams or has a condition, say, I mean, look, in my experience working with dreams, very often disability appears in someone's process. They feel, or they, you know, maybe they have an amputation or something like that. And so I would want to have a discussion about him, about how to approach a person with a real disability. Do you always look at that symbolically? Because when people come in to analysis, sometimes they actually have physical pain, or they have to deal with experiences unique to them. For example, social difficulties or social biases or physical difficulties. And I think sometimes Jungians, we take everything symbolically. We say, well, maybe your real experience, that isn't as serious. So I think I would want to talk to him about that, as well as I would want to talk about just the whole nature of the body, because Jung was very intent on bringing the body back into and the instincts back into the sense of wholeness of a person. So I'm not sure that answered your question exactly, but
yeah, it did. And I'm trying to remember a quote that I read a long time ago in terms of Jung, and in terms of, and maybe you can help me. Someone said, sometimes it's not symbolic, it's real.
It's real. Yes, exactly.
It's real.
Exactly.
You know, so for the women that you worked with, their disabilities were real.
Yes.
Whatever happened symbolically in their dreams, in their artwork, in analysis with professionals or wherever, that went to another level. But it was real. They weren't dreaming up their blindness or the amputation or anything like that.
And I have worked in analysis with women who had a disability, and gosh, so many of them, they absolutely can't come without ever having talked about it before in their lives. And these are adult women. They have no one to talk to. And so we started we have to include the concrete level. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that's a very good bridge to my last question, which is, how do you want to take your work forward?
Well, my interest is working with people practically. And I know I've tossed around, you know, do I want to do another academic paper? And at the moment, no, although it may come. But I would like to develop something, and I'm slowly working toward it, something about assisting guidelines or some kind of manual perhaps of people who have a disability, and not necessarily just women, who would like to explore not only the disability, but also images of God, a very practical thing. And I would, of course, with the pandemic, yeah, we've all kind of been isolated, but it would be wonderful if there could be something concrete practical that I could work with in terms of maybe small groups And we also have to understand that when we say disability, there's a diversity of disability. There is blindness and deafness and mobility and communication, intellectual. One size does not fit all. So it's a complex project.
Well, the practical is very encouraging, but I would also encourage you to look at the possibility of an academic paper article where you synthesize some of your work.
Yeah.
But thanks very much, Elizabeth. Bonnie, I can see we have maybe 4 or 5 minutes, so I'll turn it over to you for questions for Elizabeth.
You know, I just feel that we mustn't look at time. Let's just keep going, because this, I've just written here, it's a complex tapestry of your work. Can you just imagine a massive tapestry, and it's complex and hard work and a lot of work still going into this beautiful tapestry with lovely colors and images and symbols and reality. That's how I see it. And I really look forward to you exploring the images of God in workshops with people. I love that idea. And one thing that stood out for me very powerfully was you said, while you were busy doing your work, accepting their experience.
Yeah.
And that's where you went into your work. And that's what I believe we need to live our lives with people with disability, with people without disability, learning to accept their experience. Full stop.
Yes, thank you. That's wonderful. I see Sarah has a question or comment.
Hi, Elizabeth. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say there may be an opportunity for something practical. The Anglican Church of Southern Africa at the moment has worked with a couple of people. Last year, they asked me to support them, and they've put through their Southern Africa-wide synod a resolution to become a more disability-friendly and disability-accepting church. And they're setting up a working group at this stage on what does that mean. For the moment, I'm still involved, even though I'm not an Anglican, so we'll see. But that certainly, to me, would be a possibility for some practical involvement.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. I also just attended online a symposium on disability and spirituality from Fordham University. And Sue, they are calling out for papers. So I hardly dare tell you, because now you're going to be. So I'm thinking about it. So I think there can be yeah, both sides, practical and academic. But I guess the practical thing for me is that you could reach people who are disabled and who maybe don't have another means of growth. And academia sometimes gets lost in the books. But yeah, thank you, Sarah, too. That's helpful.
Roni, I saw your hand up.
She's on mute.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
It was lovely to hear you talk today. I've been very lucky to be part of a mindfulness group since the beginning of the pandemic. And it's a group that was put together for us, because I'm a carer for my son. And it was a group put together by we have this amazing carer assistance here in the UK. And what this team has done. So we have mindfulness art every week. We have, which can be on any subject, but mainly it's to help you develop your inner self. So we've had very interesting people who suffer from depression or are blind or whatever, being able to put that into art. And it has absolutely brought this extraordinary group from being like unable to cope to most of them being really, I mean, I was able to say the other day, bring it on. I can now, you know, give me whatever you want to do and I'll you know, bring it up, just bring it on. And I think it does help with your spirituality, whatever your spirituality is, or how you find the universal God, or whatever you want to call it. And if you were interested, I could give you the names of the people that organized it over here, if you wanted ideas for South Africa, because I know that they would love to pass on their information. And one of the most fantastic things was doing a mindfulness journal over 5 weeks, which is based on Clang. Now, I don't have my book next to me, but it's communication, learning, activities, noticing, and going out and getting it done. I think you're 5, Clang. So yes, with pleasure. If you want my email address, I'm happy to give it to you. And
Thanks, Roni. I'll give it to Elizabeth and connect the two of you. Thanks so much for that.
Okay.
Roni's own son is
deaf and autistic.
Autistic, was deaf, and she's his carer. So, yeah. Thank you, Roni. Anybody else want to say something? Larry.
Elizabeth, wonderful. I'm literally speechless and deeply inspired by what you've done. Thank you so much. Roni, mute yourself, please. I am speechless, but I do want to share a story that brings together both gender discrimination and disability. It's a horrible story, but I want to share it. You know, my friend Cyril Axelrod, the deaf-blind priest, and we've spoken about him in the few times that we've met. Well, some years ago, quite a few years ago, because the Archbishop of Westminster then was Cardinal Murphy Cormac O'Connor, and Cyril went to the Chrism Mass at Westminster Cathedral that year with his guide, Sister Christopher, who is an Anglican sister, nun, and his guide. Anyway, they all lined up, ready to go onto the sanctuary in the procession, and the deacon, some MC, came along and hauled Cyril out of the queue and said, no, you must go and sit there with the deaf people, with your people. Well, he was furious, but he went, and he was terribly upset, and afterwards challenged this particular deacon. Why did you pull me out of the queue as we were processing? And is it because I'm deaf and that you wouldn't have? Oh, he said, no, the real reason is because your guide was a woman.
Oh.
And we couldn't have a woman on the sanctuary for the mass of the priesthood. Well, I was ready to write letters to the tablet and to all the Catholic, but he said to me, no, it's my dignity to deal with this myself. And eventually he got an appointment with Cardinal O'Connor, who was furious with the deacon, mortified, and said, if I'd only known that you were there, I would have welcomed you personally onto the sanctuary with your comm guide, Sister Christopher. Just wanted to share that story of combining gender and disability.
Now we know the church is disabled. Yeah. Thank you, Larry. We need to hear these stories, because sometimes we just can hardly believe it, but it happens.
So Elizabeth, you brought stories to light, and so I'm afraid you're going to have to carry on writing. Did I see somebody else's hand up?
Can I just add?
Yeah.
It's Anna here. Thank you, Elizabeth. While I know your work well, I just once more am impressed for this voice, because these weird stories, like Larry tells us here, it goes on all the time. I work in churches concerning the inclusion of persons with disabilities, and these stories go on all the time. Horrific stories, and specifically with women. So we have to work hard and speak out loud to change attitudes. Thank you.
Someone said that being a woman and being disabled is a double handicap, you know.
Yeah.
I think as a final word, Bonnie, for myself, I would like to just please acknowledge, I want to acknowledge the courage and the trusting of the people who shared their stories with me. I highly respect them. And I know as a group here that you have heard some very personal stories, and that you also will respect them as well. Yeah.
Yes, Elizabeth, you know, we've moved on to conversation, and we've sidelined them kind of in a way, and they make up, they are the reason why we're learning like we are today. So yes, from me, I thank them. And you were saying as well, one of them said, journey to find meaning and moving towards wholeness. And we all do that, but I can't put myself in the position of a person with a disability, but as you were saying, they work harder at it. Am I right?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if I think everyone in some way has some limitations that they have to work with. I think with a disability, a physical disability or mental, then perhaps we're forced to, or it comes to our mind before aging. You see, sometimes we don't realize some of these limitations and ask some of these questions until we experience limitations, and that doesn't come until we're aging or something. I don't know. Yeah, but I take your point. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just, I don't know if any of you.
1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah, carry on.
I don't know if any of you have heard about the 10 spoons. I'll send it to you, Bonnie, and if you could send it to everybody else.
Yeah.
I came across this by kind of complete accident, and it has absolutely changed my way of how I deal with James. Because say you start every day with 10 spoons. Okay, this is a wonderful way to put it. So a very healthy person starts each day with 10 spoons. But somebody with a disability, now you could have, now let's just take James. James already has lost 5 spoons with his autism because it's very serious. So he'll use 1 spoon to get out of bed, clean his teeth, have his breakfast. He's left with 2 spoons. And he's got to get through the day on those 2 spoons. And that is where the stress and all the other things that come into life get taken up. And this actually describes, it's like someone with chronic fatigue. They have not got 10 spoons. They might have 8 spoons. So they are forcing themselves to try and keep up with everybody else. And none of us, unless you've experienced it or you've learned about this, understand about this concept. And because I like physical pictures, the 10 spoons made complete sense to me.
Thank you. That's another very, very relevant and helpful thing.
I'll send it to you now.
Thanks very much.
And if you can send it on.
I will. Anybody who wants it, just contact me and I will forward it on to you. Well, once again, thank you very much to everybody for joining today for another Coffee with God. Elizabeth, it was absolutely superb. And Sue, thank you so much. I can see everybody nodding and everybody has really gained so much. It's been an incredible experience to walk this last hour with you. Thank you.
Glad to be part of it.
Thank you again, Bonnie, for your organizing and
thank you. And thank you again to EJ, who is our Zoom host. Always faithful, EJ. Thank you so much. And I promise you, he will send the YouTube. In fact, you should subscribe to his YouTube.
Yes.
Because then you'll automatically get it as soon as he posts it. So do that, okay? Subscribe to it when you get it. All right, everybody. Lovely to see all of you this afternoon. And look forward to seeing you again at our next Coffee with God, and that will be in June. I don't know what it's going to be yet. We'll see what God has in store for us. Okay, thank you, everybody. God bless you all. And
bye.